What's going on, everyone? It's Monday morning, and I'm back taking an early look at Week 16 waiver wire pickups. And if you've survived this far, then congrats, because the majority of us that have are in the championship rounds right now. So let's get into it. Obviously, we still have Monday Night Football left, Falcons, Bucks. But regardless, I've got my list of top 10 players, and this week I am going quality over quantity because, like I said, championship round, you don't want to make too many changes. You want to get quality guys that are going to really make a difference. Don't want to go too deep in the waiver wire. So let's take a look at the guys that I have in mind. Starting at the quarterback position, if you've been a person that's been streaming these guys all year long, then look, good news, because Week 16 offers some upside at the quarterback position yet again, and starting with a guy in Nick Foles that we were all very cautiously optimistic about heading into Week 15. And if you went ahead and rolled the dice on him, then you were very nicely rewarded, because he went and balled out versus the Giants. 237 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an offensive explosion. And the good news is, because there was that uncertainty, he is still available in a good amount of leagues. And if you need that stability at that position for quarterback and you don't have a stud, Foles can be that person, especially in a Week 16 matchup versus that Raiders defense. If you can, go ahead, add Foles, you will not regret it. Continuing on, a guy that I really like this week is Joe Flacco. And look, I know what you're going to say. Flacco isn't exactly the most reliable guy when it comes to the quarterback position in fantasy. But let me counter with this. Look at the matchup. He gets the Indianapolis Colts in Baltimore, and look no further than what Brock Osweiler just did to that secondary, because he lit them up. And if he can do it, then I have full confidence that Flacco can do the same, because look at his stats from this week. 288 yards passing, 1 touchdown through the air, 1 touchdown on the ground. Now, I will say, don't expect that rushing touchdown to appear again next week. That's not his forte. But as far as the passing yards go, fully expect to see something around 300 yards, hopefully a multi-touchdown passing game. And I fully believe that at a point in time where the Ravens desperately need wins to keep up in terms of the playoff contention in the AFC for the wild cards, that they will go ahead and ball out, and Joe Flacco will be a big reason. So if you can, go ahead, add Joe Flacco this week. Go this week. And finally, rounding out the last name on my list of quarterbacks, I've got Blake Bortles. And this is a guy who's in a similar situation as to Nick Foles, because he was a hot name heading into Week 15. And if he wasn't picked up in your leagues, then I do urge you to go ahead and take a shot on him, because he gets a very favorable matchup versus the 49ers defense. Now, that 49ers team allowed Marcus Mariota statistically to have a decent game after a stretch where he was struggling, and I definitely think Bortles and the Jaguars can do the same. I fully expect the Jaguars defense to get some turnovers and to help that offense. Bortles is coming off 326 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. And on top of that, if Fournette doesn't play, I do expect Bortles to have more of a role in that offense. So if you can, go ahead, take a shot on Blake Bortles. Moving on to the wide receiver position, I'm going to start with the guy that I think you should be targeting above all others at this position, Martavis Bryant of the Steelers. And obviously this is due to the Antonio Brown injury. Looks like he's going to miss the remainder of the regular season. Don't exactly know how long he'll be out for, but regardless, Bryant becomes the guy to own now. Obviously, Juju is still going to be a factor, but he's not really available on waivers anymore. However, Martavis Bryant might be, and I think he should be targeted heavily. Coming off 4 receptions, 59 yards, and a touchdown, I honestly think he's the next best available receiver on that offense, and the Steelers get a very nice matchup versus that Houston defense. Obviously, at this point, the Steelers need games to win and to stay course with the Patriots if somehow they stumble, so they get that home field advantage through the playoffs. So definitely, they're still playing for something. So if you can, go ahead, add Martavis Bryant off waivers. Next, a guy in Keelan Cole of the Jaguars, who's coming off a record game for himself, 7 receptions, 186 yards, and a touchdown. Now, obviously, a lot of this was due to the fact that Lee went out for the Jaguars, and I highlight Blake Bortles, and I definitely think that entire Jaguars offense versus the 49ers next week can have a big game. And look, obviously, probably Data Westbrook not available off waivers. If he is, he's also worth adding, but Keelan Cole, another name to keep in mind. If you track his production back to the last couple weeks, he has played quite nicely and been under the radar. If Lee is unavailable, a very good name to go ahead and keep in the back of your mind to pick up. And finally, the last name on my list of wide receivers, Mike Wallace of the Ravens. And similar to the situation of the Jaguars, I think the Ravens are going to have a very nice offensive day versus that Indianapolis defense. And Wallace may be that flex piece that you're missing. He's just coming off 6 receptions, 89 yards, and I definitely think he can take advantage of the Colts secondary with his speed. Definitely becoming one of the top targets of Joe Flacco. So go ahead if you can. Mike Wallace of the Ravens has a very nice matchup versus the Colts. Next, looking at the running back position, unfortunately it gets a little bit ugly here because there's not that many guys to go ahead and target. I will go ahead and start with Chris Ivory and TJ Yeldon of the Jaguars, and you can pretty much see the theme of this so far has been Jaguar heavy, and I'm going to keep to it because look, obviously this is predicated on whether Leonard Fournette can suit up or not. If he can't, these guys are very nice options. Chris Ivory did get a little nicked up towards the end of the game. That's why TJ Yeldon's name is here. As far as the stats go, Chris Ivory dominated in terms of carries, 17 for 42 yards. And then TJ Yeldon, more of that PPR guy, 7 carries, 27 yards, but also had 4 receptions for 25 yards. Now, I will say I feel more comfortable with Chris Ivory and taking the chance on him if he's available over TJ Yeldon. And again, obviously, these two guys predicated on whether Fournette suits up or not. And the final name on my list of running backs, Kerwynn Williams of the Cardinals. And look, I know he was a name that was being discussed in Week 15, but as far as fantasy leagues are concerned, he is still technically under-owned in a lot of them. And I'm going to say, you know, in a tough week in terms of running back ads, not a bad name to consider because he's definitely coming off the bulk of the carries in that offense. 17 carries for 61 yards. Obviously didn't have a touchdown, get in the end zone, or go over 100 yards. But he has a decent matchup versus the New York Giants. So if you can, go ahead. Probably more of a running back 2/running back 3 guy. But if you are desperate and you've been streaming guys at that second running back spot, not a bad guy to consider. Moving on to the tight end position, again, kind of slim pickings here, and unless someone in your league dropped a guy like Greg Olsen because they got fed up with him, then, you know, not too many choices. But the guy that I have in mind, Eric Ebron of the Lions, and look, he's coming off 5 receptions, 33 yards, and a touchdown. And the reason why you should target him, twofold. Obviously, his usage has been going up the last couple weeks, but more importantly, decent matchup versus the Bengals. On top of that, the Lions are fighting for their playoff lives in terms of wildcard positioning. So if anything, they're going to give it their all. I think they are a pass-first team, so Ebron, even though he is touchdown dependent, I think he can get you somewhere between 8 and 10 points. So if you've been streaming that position, Ebron, not a bad name to consider. And finally, getting to the all-important defensive position, I've actually got a couple names in mind. And again, somewhat slim pickings here because a lot of the good matchups here favor the really good defenses that are probably already owned. And starting off with the Vikings defense, I know that I'm kind of breaking my own rule, but the only reason that I mentioned them is maybe someone went ahead and dropped them because they were scared that Aaron Rodgers might be available for that game. But after the loss that the Packers had versus the Panthers, I wouldn't be surprised if Rodgers doesn't play the rest of the season. They've pretty much been eliminated from the playoffs, so the Vikings, a very nice option. If they're somehow available, go ahead, definitely add them. Moving on now to some more realistic defenses, however. I have in mind the Bears versus Cleveland. I think honestly this is going to be a low-scoring game. It's going to be an ugly game. It's going to be a tough game to watch, but I think offensive points are going to be far and few in between, and that defense has been the strength of the Bears all season long. I think they ride it and they keep the Cleveland Browns winless. And moving on, the Lions defense versus the Bengals. And again, kind of similar situation in terms of the matchup. The Bengals have just been struggling horribly these last couple of weeks offensively, and I think that continues versus the Lions. I brought it up before. I think the Lions right now are playing for their playoff lives, and I think they're going to bring their best foot forward. For that reason, I like the Lions defense. And finally, the last defense that I have in mind, if they are available again, the Steelers defense versus the Texans. Maybe a lot of people panicked when they got -1 or -2 points, however many it was, versus the Ravens, and they went ahead and dropped them. But look, they have a favorable matchup versus the Texans. If Yates plays again, then the Steelers defense, a very nice option, so go ahead and add them if you can. And with that, we come to a wrap of our championship round feature waiver wire pickups. And let me know what you guys thought. You know, are there names that I missed? Are there names that you would take off this list? Let me know what you guys think. As always, hit me up in the comments section. I'll do my best to answer. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and to everyone in their championship rounds, good luck, you got it, and I'll see you guys in future videos.